Hi everyone, this is Tanya with Flying Dog Studio. Thank you so much for joining me as I add another page in my Wonder Journal. And if you're new to the channel, or if you're not new to the channel and you've never joined me for one of these Wonder Journal entries, I'll explain more about that in just a bit. But first, let's talk about my process. As you can see, I've already drawn out what I'm going to be drawing and painting today, and I'm going to be inking it in with this. This is the Pilot Falcon, and that's the tip on it. It's a flexible nib, so it allows me to get thick and thin lines, which is important because I'm going to be trying to emulate Beatrix Potter. And if you watched my stuff before, you know I love Beatrix Potter. So we're going to be doing this in a couple of parts before I actually put the paint to the paper. Now this is just one long video, so when I say parts, I'm not actually doing more than one video. But the first part that I'm drawing in and inking is the foreground, and then we are going to have the middle ground, which is just going to be pencil, and I haven't drawn that in yet because this is a very complicated plant, and we'll talk about the type of plant this is in just a minute. But it has so many little parts to it that I decided probably if I look at Cicely Mary Barker's technique or Beatrix Potter, it would benefit me a bit more in kind of translating this onto paper. So here we go with the middle ground, and I'm going to be using the Lamy All-Star pencil to get all of that in, and like magic, there it is. So you can see it is a very complicated piece, and having that foreground already inked in is just going to make it easier for us. These are the supplies I'm going to be using. This is from the Royal and Lane Nichols Zen series. That was their size 8 round, and these two little blue handle brushes are from Winsor & Newton. They're Cotman series. I have a size 3 and a size 6 round. I have a microfiber cloth and then a cup of water, and the paints I will be using again are from Winsor & Newton. I'll have all of these listed below. This is not the case that it came in. I transferred all of my little pans to this because I like this palette on the side. So that's why I have it in that pan. Now that we have all of that out of the way, let's get started on the piece. And let's talk first about the palette. You see that I have water in the palette. I like to put water down first because that allows me to transfer the color to the palette with the least amount of loss of color. And here's the technique I'm using first. I'm going to be using a couple of techniques to finish this piece. I'm starting with the background, and you can see I'm putting water on the paper first. So this is wet on wet technique. My background is kind of blurred out. There's other foliage in the back, but it's not distinct. I still want to include that. I could just put the plant and leave the background blank. I've done that before in this book, but I really wanted to include the foliage. So I'm going to do this where I simply drop in the color wet on wet. And it's very simple to do that. And remember, the paint is only going to go where you put the water, if you're careful. I don't have a steady hand, so sometimes it will go where I don't want it to. You'll see me dab a little bit here and there, but theoretically, it should only go where you put the water. So that's my technique for the background. As far as the palette goes for the rest of this video, I'm going to try to keep the colors in the same spot that I have them. You'll see that I will refresh the colors. And whenever I put a new color up, I will put on the screen that it's a new color. And when you see me put a color up again in that spot, it will be that same color. So I'm not going to be working around the palette adding, strange colors on there for you. It's going to be the same colors that we started with in the beginning, with a couple more that I will add in and a couple of areas where I mix colors together. So you might want to write them down, go back, write those down where they are on the palette so you'll know what I'm doing throughout the piece in case you want to follow along. And if you have followed along with my Wonder Journals, then you know what a Wonder Journal video is. But in case you don't, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of art. We're going to talk about art, and in this case, we're going to talk a little bit about science, which if you know me on here, you know that I'm a science major, so that kind of excites me. So we're going to talk a little bit about science in this case, and we're going to talk about history. And if you read the title of the video, we're going to talk about what truth is. Because the Wonder Journal for me, all of this is like research. When I'm reading in my Bible, and if you're not Christian, that's okay, hang in, because to me, this is kind of like a mystery. And if you've ever wondered about Christianity and you had questions about it, or you're not so certain, that's okay, because there isn't a Christian out there who can't relate to that. And for me, I like to research everything. I don't want to take anyone's word for it, and you shouldn't either. So as you're watching this video, if you're watching it as it's coming out, hopefully you're watching it on a Saturday, and we are in Holy Week. So for Christians, this is what our foundational belief is. We believe that Jesus is God come to earth. He was born of a virgin. We believe he died on the cross. We believe that he rose on the third day, and belief in him is the only way to heaven. Now, that's the foundation of it. If there's any part of it that's wrong, then everything crumbles. So I wanted to check something out on this whole, and I guess you could say resurrection history. And I'm going to call it history because to me the Bible is history. But I wanted to check it out. I wanted to check some things and make certain that they're true. But let me stop for a second and say, we're switching back to the art. This is what we do in the Wonder Journal. We switch back and forth. There's my water. I wanted to show you that because I'm putting down clear water. I am doing wet on wet, but it looks like I'm applying green paint. I'm not. My water's so green. So if you see green on there, I'm still doing wet on wet. Technique hasn't changed. The water's just gotten dirty and Tanya's not changing it. So let's go on with the Wonder Journal. Now, as I am studying during Holy Week about what leads up to the crucifixion, the Roman soldiers put a crown of thorns on Jesus's head. And I wanted to know more about what that crown of thorns was made of. And that led me to the rabbit hole that is this video, because we're not just going to talk about what the crown was made of. We're going to talk about some other evidence that the crucifixion occurred, and so did the resurrection. I want to know if those are true. And so I'm looking for the evidence, and I'm going to tell you what I found because it's kind of exciting. So first of all, let's talk about this plant. This plant, and even though I was a science major, I hate scientific names. But this particular plant is called, the common name is called the tumble thistle. Now, think of a tumbleweed with thorns, and you've got it. But the scientific name is the Gundula tournefortii. There you go. And I'm going to link all of this down below so that you can look it all up for yourself. Everything I'm talking about, all the links will be below. So go check it out for yourself. Again, don't take my word for it. But this plant, this thistle plant, I'm going to call it a thorn plant because those are thorns. I've seen a thistle, and that's a thorn, because this plant is found in the Mediterranean and Middle East, and it will flower between February and May. And the part that I am doing in this video, I would say is probably the flowering part. So that's probably the time period we're looking at on this one. It can be used as food, if you can imagine that, and in some of their traditional medicines from that area. Now, when my daughter looked at the final piece, she said, it kind of looks like an artichoke. And it's so funny that she said that because in my research, I found out that it tastes kind of like an artichoke. So I guess, go figure, it does. But you have to take the spines off to eat it. I think that goes without saying. And those thorns that are on it range anywhere, once it's mature, anywhere from 1.5 to 2 inches long. And there you have the science part of the video. So no more scientific names. Now let's move on to a little bit more of my research as far as researching the events and any evidence that shows whether the crucifixion and resurrection actually occurred. And in order to do that, I feel like I need to give you a bit of a background. And of course, that means I'm going to have to read some Bible verses, but I'm not going to read a lot, just enough to give you an idea of where we're going on it, so you'll understand the research that I did and the evidence that I'm talking about. So at this point, Jesus is going to be betrayed by one of his own people, one of his own disciples, and he's going to go in front of Pilate, and they're going to decide, the people are going to decide whether or not he's going to be crucified or if he's going to be released. And spoiler alert, he's going to be crucified. So most of the verses, actually I think maybe all of the verses I'm using come from John. You can find different accounts, and it's the same account, but it's sort of like a bunch of people taking a picture of the same flower, and they're all the way around it. They're all going to have different angles, and that's what you get in the Gospels. So we're going to go to John and take a look at John's version, because it really fits more along with the particular research that I did. So John 18, verses 37 through 38, it says, Pilate therefore said to him, and he's talking to Jesus here, "Are you a king then?" And Jesus answered, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, "I find no fault in him at all." Now at this point, I want to skip ahead. We are going to come back to the events that happen after this, when Jesus is found guilty and he does go to the cross. But I want to skip ahead a bit because I need to introduce an article of evidence. I feel like we're in a court here, so I'm going to introduce some evidence to the court, and you can be the jury. You're going to have to decide for yourself. I can't decide for you. I can only provide you with the evidence that I've found. So after Jesus has been crucified, I want to read from John 19:38 through 42. This is what happens after he is crucified. After this, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him permission. So he came and took the body of Jesus. And Nicodemus, who at first came to Jesus by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds. Then they took the body of Jesus and bound it in strips of linen with the spices, as the custom of the Jews is to bury. Now the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb, in which no one had yet been laid. So there they laid Jesus, because of the Jews' preparation day, for the tomb was nearby. Before we go on with that bit of evidence that matches that Bible verse, let's take a look at what I'm doing right now. You can see I'm starting to mix up some colors because I'm no longer working wet on wet. I'm working wet on dry, and I've moved from the background to the middle ground. So this is all of the pencil work that I'm working on. And you can see right here, I lose my mind a little bit and I'm painting in the inked parts. I didn't mean to do that, but since it's over by itself, I went ahead and just kind of finished that up and moved on to some other areas so I could come back and paint around it. It had been a long week and I was working on sleep deprivation, so forgive me for that. But this is my process right now. I'm working with a little more paint in my brush and a little less water so that this part of the piece will stand out more than the background. And this is a technique that you can see in Cicely Mary Barker and in Beatrix Potter when they want to create depth and a little, just a little bit of 3 dimension in here to show that there's stuff in the background, but they still want it to be a part and be important to the foreground. This is what they'll do. They won't ink it in, and instead they'll leave it in pencil and they will add the watercolor to it. Now, I don't know if they did that first and then did the foreground. I'm assuming, because that's the way I do all of my work, so that's the way I'm doing it. But I'm going to be working all on the pencil lines right now in the middle ground. Okay, let's go back to the piece of evidence. The piece of evidence is actually owned by the Catholic Church. Now, if you look this up, it'll say it's owned by the Pope, but popes change, so we're going to call it the Catholic Church. So it's owned by the Catholic Church, and it's kept, now we pronounce it in the U.S. as Turin, so it's kept in Turin, Italy. I think in that region they would say it Touraine, but we're going to say Turin just because that's what I'm used to saying. And this evidence is a shroud. And what is the shroud? Well, now, I just read to you, they wrapped him in a linen cloth. So the shroud is a linen cloth that measures, and you're going to see discrepancies online, but it measures about 14 feet in length and about 3.5 feet in width. And on it is the image of a crucified man. In addition to that, it contains blood stains and pollen grains. Now, the linen is kind of special. Each linen thread consists of multiple fibers spun by hand in a clockwise direction known as a Z-twist. The shroud fabric has kind of a herringbone weave. It's diagonal in a 3-to-1 pattern, which was used in the Middle East and Egypt during the 1st century AD. So that's putting us in the right time frame for this. And the reason we know what the crucified man looks like on the shroud was back in May of 1898, a man named Secondo Pia. He was an Italian photographer. He was allowed to take a photograph of the shroud and what he discovered when he developed the negative. So this is back before digital times when he develop the negative. And usually a negative is the reverse of the image, and then you process it into a photograph and then you see the actual image. Well, it turns out the shroud is actually a negative, and the negative itself looked like the photograph of a crucified man. And we don't have just this piece of evidence with the shroud. We have another piece of linen that's called the sudarium. Now, the sudarium is located not in Italy, but it's located in Oviedo, Spain. And what the sudarium is a piece of woven linen cloth measuring about 33 inches to 21 inches, and it would be used to place over the face of the person after death to preserve the dignity of the deceased. It is covered, the one we have in evidence is covered with blood stains and pleural fluid. Now, I said you weren't going to get any more science, so here's a bit of forensics for you. What is pleural fluid? Well, you have your lungs, and your lungs set in your chest cavity. Now, the lungs, the outside lining of the lungs is called the pleura, and the space between the pleura and the chest cavity is the pleural cavity, and it has fluid that separate the lungs and the chest wall cavity, which, it's kind of like a lubricant. It allows you to breathe with ease. However, if you are someone being crucified on a Roman cross, you are going to die of asphyxiation. When you die of asphyxiation, that fluid is going to be forced into your lungs. It has to go somewhere. So where that fluid is going to go is out your mouth and out of your nose. So I warned you, there would be some forensics in this, so a little bit of science and forensics. So that's what they found on here, blood stains and pleural fluid. But we have to know, as Pilate said, what is truth? What is the truth? Has the shroud been tested? Is it real? Well, yes, it has been tested. So let's take a look at what they found. But before we do that, let's go back to our piece. You're going to notice that I'm skipping around a little bit. There are two reasons for that. Number one, kind of like at the beginning when I'm painting the wrong piece, down at the bottom lower left-hand corner, I have to move around and let some stuff dry because these things are overlapping and I don't want the paint to bleed into each other. And if I think it's going to bleed and I don't want that color in that area, then I'm going to skip and work on another area and then come back. Also, I wanted to point this out. A lot of these little spines that come out, they're red on the tip, green at the base. So the easiest way to get that down on paper is to start at one end. You saw I started with the red and brought it down part way. And I'm using a little bit more water on my brush. And then I start at the bottom with the green and then meet it in the middle. And that allows those to kind of merge together and give us a nice transition. Now, another reason I'm skipping around is because I'm letting areas dry. I want to get more concentration of color because I want it to stand out more than the background. I want to make sure it does that. And you're especially going to see that on those little spines sticking up, those little thorns. I'm going to work around, let that area dry, and then I'll come back and put more color on top, and that gives me a better concentration of color and allows it to stand out from that background. I don't want it as dark as what I'm going to have the foreground. Don't want it as detailed. So I have to be careful with that at this point. And you could always come back and do this after you do your foreground if you don't want to get it too dark. But I'm going to be adding it on. I'm going to go ahead and do mine. I'm going to go ahead and add it on. So that's what you're seeing in this part. Let's talk a little bit more about the testing of the shroud. And it all started in 1976. And again, I'll have all this research down below. And you can take a look at things for yourself and decide whether or not you believe that it is actually an authentic piece of linen. But in 1976, two American scientists took a look at the photo of the shroud, and they decided they had something called a VP8 image analyzer. That sounds like something scientific or some kind of car part. But what this VP8 image analyzer does is it converts light and dark areas of an image into height and depth. So kind of like what we're doing on this piece. We want height and we want depth. They did it with an image analyzer. We're having to do it by hand on here. And what they would find if they were taking a picture of a flat photograph, it would simply give them a big blob. And that's kind of what I think they thought was going to happen with the shroud. But instead of distorting like a 2D photograph would, like a normal flat surface, instead the flat surface of that image on the shroud transformed into a perfect 3D relief of a crucified man. And to take some of this research a little bit further, in 1978, another group of scientists took a look at it because my thought would be the same. Somebody painted it on there. Well, they didn't find any pigments as far as paints, and they didn't find any brush strokes on the cloth. So scientists concluded that it was not made by an artist. And when you take a look at each linen thread on the cloth, it is made up of tiny fibers, like dozens of them. Yet in the image area, only 2 to 4 of these fibers are darkened. 2 to 4 fibers. We're talking about something that's probably the size of a human hair. That's all that was darkened. Now let's take a look at 1988. Scientists cut, can you believe it? They cut about a little over a 3-inch strip from the top left corner, and they sent it to 3 different labs. They cut the sample in 2 parts, and they kept one part in reserve, and they took that second part, and like I said, they put it in 3 different pieces, sent it to 3 different labs for radiocarbon dating. And what they came back with is that this cloth was made in the Middle Ages. So that's kind of sad, right? I built you up for that. And it was made in the Middle Ages. But wait, there's more. The problem with this, and in 2019, a study reviewed and invalidated the 1988 results because, you see, this piece of linen had been around for 2,000 years and it had been through a lot. They used to take it out for like weddings and in churches. Can you imagine if this is a holy relic and this is what they're doing with it? But that's what they did. And in 1532, where the shroud was being held, there was a fire and it got damaged. So the nuns painstakingly repatched it, and they tried to follow exactly the kind of stitching that was done on it. And you can see, if you look up a picture of the shroud, you'll see these big areas in the center of obvious big patches, but they also wove little threads throughout it to try and patch it. They wanted to preserve it. They didn't want it to just deteriorate. And so what they were getting from their sample when they decided it was from the Middle Ages, some of those threads were actually from the Middle Ages. And apparently they took all of their testing and just added it together, all of the dates, and averaged them. And that's not how you're supposed to radio date things. It's also called C14, carbon-14 dating. You're not supposed to do that with radiocarbon dating. And that's what they did. So we cannot trust, and I'm going to leave that for you to judge, but we cannot trust the Middle Ages as the date for this cloth. And we keep talking about the crucified man on the cloth, but is there actual evidence of crucifixion? And if so, is it Jesus's crucifixion? Well, let's take a look at what John 19 verses 2 through 3 say about Jesus's crucifixion. And the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put on him a purple robe. Then they said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him with their hands. So what does the cloth have to say? Well, on the cloth, there are evidence of blood wounds. Now, there's blood all over the cloth. And again, this is going to be some forensic evidence. So if you don't want to hear about blood, you might want to mute this part. But on the head area, there is blood, and these wounds appear to be from thorns. And when we think of a crown of thorns, we think of the artist's rendition of a loop that goes around the head, kind of a circle. But with the plant that I'm painting here, I think you can see that would be kind of impossible, especially when they're calling it a tumbleweed. So what they're seeing is that the crown of thorns was most likely a helmet or a cap, because these wounds go over the entire skull. As a matter of fact, the man on the shroud had over 50 puncture wounds across his skull and the nape of his neck. On the back of his head, the thorns cut all the way into the occipital artery and some deep veins. So there was a lot of blood on this. Now, the sudarium, the face cloth, it also contains blood stains that match the shroud. So that is amazing. Both cloths touched the same crucified man. Now, that is not me saying that. That is from research that they've done. When they put them together, one on top, they can see the stains match perfectly. Both cloths, now they has blood on it, and they typed the blood. Both cloths have type A, B blood stains. Now, I don't have this in my notes, but this is some more science for you. When you're talking about blood types, O is the universal donor. So if you have type O, you can donate blood and everybody can have type O. Type AB is the universal recipient. It can take a type A, it can take type B, it can take A and B, and it can take O. So just like Jesus, he was the recipient of the universe's sins. So that's really kind of cool. So I thought I would add that in there. Okay, the sudarium. on the man's head. It was on him when he was in a vertical position. So they would not have put this on him when he was lying down. And remember, it has that fluid in it from the lungs. So that would have been at the point of death. All of that would have already come out of his nose and his mouth and been on there. It wouldn't have come on after he had died. It would have been while he was asphyxiating. Now, analysis of the pollen. So let's talk about the pollen that was on the shroud to see if it matches up with that crown of thorns. And this is how I know that this tumble thistle was what they believe was used for the crown of thorns, because they identified a combination of plant species that could be found only in March and April in the region of Jerusalem. And the pollen was that of the tumbleweed. So yes, it is proving out to be that he did have a crown of thorns and that it was made from this plant and it came from Jerusalem. So that's checking out more on the authenticity of this cloth. Now let's take a look at the body wounds. We've talked about the crown, but I want to move on and get some more evidence because that's just the way I think. But before we do, let's go back again to our tumble thistle, or I'm going to call it our tumble thorns. Let's take a look at what I'm doing right now. I am working on the foreground, and you can see I have much less water on my brush. And I have chosen to use the Winsor & Newton brushes because they hold a little less water than the Royal and Langnickel. So this is allowing me to put a little bit more paint on the paper and kind of bring those forward. And I'm going to be going back and forth and adding some more to those thistles in the middle ground. So you're going to be seeing that too. Okay, let's go back and talk about the body wounds. And again, from this point on, we're going to be talking about graphic stuff. So please be prepared for that. So let's take a look at Matthew. And so I do get out of John and I do go into Matthew. This is Matthew 26, verses 66 through 68. And it says, "What do you think?" They answered and said, "He is deserving of death." Then they spat in his face and beat him, and others struck him with the palms of their hands, saying, "Prophesy to us, Christ, who is the one who struck you?" So right now, this is before he gets to Pilate, and these are his own people that are striking him in the face. And let's see if that can be seen on the shroud. And in fact, it can be. There is visible evidence of trauma on the face. You can see severe swelling of the upper right cheek under the eye socket, and there is also a deviated septum. Now, the septum is the cartilage. That's not a bone. That's the cartilage of the nose. So that has been dislocated. Well, let's take a look at John 19:1 and see what that scripture has to say. "So then Pilate took Jesus and scourged him." Now, scourging is a beating. It's a beating with a Roman flagrum, and we'll talk about that just in a second. But does it show that on the shroud? As a matter of fact, it does. The man on the shroud had 360 separate wounds on his body. The wounds are located on the back, the buttocks, the arms, and the legs. And the markings from the wound have the shape that match a Roman flagrum. And a Roman flagrum, as I said, it is a whip, and it has 3 leather straps tipped with either metal balls or bone fragments. So those whip marks can be seen. 360 separate wounds. Now, the blood has high levels, this is a little science for you, high levels of creatinine and bilirubin. Now, those are the parts of the blood that are produced when the body is under immense physical stress. So if you say, well, someone could have just dabbed blood on there. Well, they could have, but they're going to need to be beating someone, and that person is going to need to be under extreme physical stress in order for creatinine and bilirubin to be produced. Otherwise, it's just blood, and it does not show someone that had stress on their body. Let's go on to John 19, verses 17 through 18. And he, bearing his cross, went out to a place called the place of the skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha, where they crucified him, and two others with him, one on either side, and Jesus in the center. Does the man on the cloth show that he was crucified? Yes, he does. There is a large puncture wound visible in the right wrist. Now, his hands at the time of death were pulled down, and the right hand was put on top of the left hand, so we cannot see the left wrist. The nail mark would not be through the palm of the hand. It has to be through the wrist because there are more tiny bones there. When you're talking about the bones in the hand, you have the carpals, then you have the metacarpals. Those are the bones like in the palm of your hand. Your wrist bones are the carpals, and the metacarpals, and then the phalanges are your digits. Those are your fingers. So you could not put a nail mark through the center of the hand because the metacarpals look kind of like the bones for the fingers. They're long. So if you put a nail there, it's going to split right down the middle. But if you go through the wrist, and that's where the nails were on the man on the cloth, then that's going to hold the body up for crucifixion. Also, neither thumb was visible on either hand, indicating that the thumbs were retracted by a nerve impingement in the wrist from the trauma of a spike. Also, there were wounds, puncture wounds, on both feet. So that all matches up. Let's go on with John 19, verses 31 through 37. Therefore, because it was the preparation day, that the body should not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for the Sabbath was a high day, the Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. Then the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who was crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out. And he who has seen has testified, and his testimony is true. And he knows that he is telling the truth, so that you may believe. For these things were done, that the scripture should be fulfilled. Not one of his bones shall be broken. And again, another scripture says, they shall look on him whom they pierced. And those are the words of John. So let's take a look at the evidence. There is on the cloth on the man a large puncture wound that can be seen between the 5th and 6th ribs, matching the width of a 1st century Roman lance. And when we look at the blood from the puncture wound, when it was photographed under a UV fluorescent light, the clear serum halos became visible around the bloodstains. And what that means is, as a result of the separation of the red blood components from the clear serum, when the heart stops circulating, the blood after death. So that puncture wound was made after he was dead. Whoever the man is on the shroud, when that puncture wound was made, he was dead, because we can see under the UV fluorescent light that there is a clear separation in the blood components. Now, is there evidence of a resurrection? Well, let's take a look and see what Matthew has to say. So in Matthew 17, verses 22 through 23, it says, Now while they were staying in Galilee, Jesus said to them, The Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and the 3rd day he will be raised up. And they were exceedingly sorrowful. And then we're going to go to John again, chapter 20, verses 1 through 8. Now on the 1st day of the week, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. Then she ran and came to Simon Peter and to the other disciple, and the other disciple is John, whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Peter therefore went out, and the other disciple, and they were going to the tomb. So they both ran together, and the other disciple outran Peter. So John ran faster and came to the tomb first. And he, stooping down and looking in, saw the linen cloths lying there, yet he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb. And he saw the linen cloths lying there, and the handkerchief that had been around his head, the one they put on when he was on the cross, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded together in a place by itself. Then the other disciple, who came to the tomb first, went in also, and he saw and believed. But do we believe? Let's take a look at the man on the shroud. Well, the man on the shroud is in a state of rigor mortis, so he's stiff. His knees are slightly bent, just like they would have been on the cross. His head is tilted forward, and his chin is resting near his chest. Now, after about 40 hours, the muscles will relax in the body, and the body will then start to decompose. There are no signs of decay on the shroud. No signs of decay, of body decay. There is no relaxation of the muscles that's evident. So he remains in this state of rigor mortis. There is no trace of ammonia gas on the shroud. Ammonia is released as a body starts to decay. And the man was wrapped in the shroud for less than 40 hours. He had to have been, because he hasn't decayed. The shroud shows no signs of decomposition or cloth removal. The dried blood by this point would have started to stick the cloth to the body. So if you tried to remove it, it would have caused blood stains to smear and to tear. And the blood stains on the shroud have defined edges. No signs of smudging, no signs of smearing. There is no evidence that the cloth was removed from this man's body. It were as if he simply disappeared. And it makes sense. You know, we say he was crucified and rose on the third day. He would have been crucified on Good Friday, which is when I am recording this. He would have been in the grave on Saturday, which is, I'm hoping, when you are listening to this. He would have risen on Sunday morning. And that, my friends, is less than 40 hours, because he died not in the morning on Friday, but in the afternoon. And that cloth that was folded over to the side, that's the face cloth we've been talking about that is housed in Spain. And in Jewish tradition, when the master of the house folds his napkin and puts it to the side, it means he will return. And there you have the extent of my research. I hope you'll take a look at it in earnest and see what you think about it. All of the links, again, will be down below. You can check those out. I'll have my Bible verses. I'll even have the reference photo for this. I believe I got it off of Wikimedia Commons. I'll take a look, but I will have all of the information down there for you. So the descriptions should be pretty lengthy. And we're going to have all of the supplies down there, the Bible verses, all of my research links, and then the photo links. So if there's anything that I leave out, please let me know, and I will put that down there. I'm certainly not infallible. I go back many times and correct my descriptions because I put something a little wrong in there. So do take a look. And if you've made it this far, thank you so much. Let's take a look at what I am doing right now. These are the final layers, and as you can see, my paint is getting pretty thick over there in the palette. That's because I want all of those little details to stand out, and the best way to do that is to have less water in your brush and more paint. And again, these Winsor & Newton brushes are excellent for that. They don't hold a whole lot of water, so when you need to get in and do the detail, you can do the detail with these brushes. And this is the size 3 that I'm using. I believe I used that through most of the entire piece. I may have used the size 6 once. I like to keep both on hand just in case, but I think I probably used the 3 because everything is kind of small in here, just kind of small. But that is it for this piece. And again, I thank you so much for being here. If you have any questions or comments, put those down below. If you have any suggestions for my next entry in the Wonder Journal, put that down below. I'm always happy to look stuff up and learn. I'm kind of a nerd on things like that. So let me know down below. I'll be happy to do that. If you have any other questions, do put those down there. I'm always happy to hear from you guys. I'm always happy when you come. And if you were new to the channel, I hope you'll subscribe and see what all I do on here. I do all kinds of things. The Wonder Journal is just a part of it. I have all kinds of, I have like a travel journal, and I have like an experiment journal, and then I do just regular pieces. I love Beatrix Potter, so I do Beatrix Potter stuff sometimes. So I hope that you will follow along if you're new to the channel. And if you've been here before, you know I'm always happy when you guys are here. Thank you so much. If you celebrate Easter, I hope you have a very blessed Easter day. And thank you so much. I love you guys. Thank you so much for being here. I have a lot more coming up in the future. I'm going to be quiet now and give you a musical interlude all the way to the end. I hope you'll join me for some of the upcoming things I have. But until then, my friends, I'll see you in the next one.